Soy Patricio Contreras y esto es Ojo en Tinta. En septiembre de 2019, mi compañero Pablo Espinosa se enteró que el ilustrador y periodista Joe Sacco vendría a Chile para participar del 7º encuentro de ilustración y cómic que se realiza en la comuna de La Reina en Santiago. Era una tremenda oportunidad, teníamos que entrevistarlo. Ese encuentro fue originalmente programado entre los días 24 y 27 de octubre, pero el 18 de ese mes ocurrió lo que ya todos sabemos, un estallido social sin precedentes que se mantiene activo hasta el día de hoy. El encuentro de ilustración fue postergado una semana y Joe Sacco coincidió con la efervescencia que se vivía y que aún se vive en las calles. Durante esos días participó en manifestaciones, asistió a asambleas y habló con especialistas para entender la economía chilena y los factores que provocaron la crisis. Creo que somos muchos los que estamos cruzando los dedos para que eventualmente pueda narrar de manera visual, en su estilo, la historia de estos sucesos. Finalmente, el sábado 2 de noviembre, Pablo y yo logramos entrevistar a Joe Sacco. Fue poco más de media hora de conversación sobre su visión de la violencia, sobre su rutina de trabajo y sobre la experiencia de algunos de sus libros, como Días de Destrucción, Días de Revuelta, realizado junto a Chris Hedge, o Notas al pie de Gaza, que se publicó hace ya una década. Acá compartimos con ustedes el audio de las respuestas de Joe Sacco. Está en inglés y no quisimos agregar un doblaje que entorpezca su voz. En nuestro sitio web ojoentinta.com publicamos parte de la entrevista en español. La primera pregunta fue de Pablo sobre Días de Destrucción, Días de Revuelta y las promesas fallidas del capitalismo. ¿Por qué se hace ese diagnóstico en el libro?
Well, this was a book I did with Chris Hedges, as you mentioned, and he's probably one of the greatest reporters I've ever met. And he has a very analytical mind. And we met a long time ago in Bosnia, and we became quite good friends. And we were thinking of doing something that would be something more local than our usual foreign correspondence. So we wanted to see what was going on in the United States, because there seemed to be plenty of despair. And we went to 4 places that he calls the sacrifice zones. And they were. It's basically those places where, for example, West Virginia, where there was mining, the coal was extracted, people worked themselves very hard, and what was left after the mines began to close down? Poverty. It's these places where people are working hard to make a living to feed their families, and the final result isn't for them. It goes into someone else's pocket, and that is sort of an example that is written larger throughout society, throughout America, the Americas, and now, of course, in Chile, where clearly people feel like whatever system exists, whether you want to call it capitalism or whatever it is, it's simply not working. And, you find people here, much like in the United States, where people are in great debt. The use of credit here has expanded, where the minimum wage is really too low to live on, and where pensions are a pathetic fraction of the minimum wage. So what are people supposed to do? Wait for the economic miracle of Chile to continue? So who is this miracle for? And I understand why people are in the street. As the question is, why aren't they on the street in other places? And I think part of the reason is, in Chile, it seems, I'm not sure how it happened, but it seems that people from different social and economic classes feel basically the same thing. You find middle-class students who are in big debt, and then you find people from poorer parts on the outskirts of Santiago who are paying a lot of money to get to town, don't earn much money. They're spending 3 hours traveling back and forth. There's no childcare for their children. all these things are, showing that all segments of society except the elite are suffering. And for some reason, it's understood now that everyone is suffering. In the United States, a lot of people are suffering from many classes, the middle class, the poorer classes, but they haven't found that solidarity yet. Because in the United States, there are many more things that divide people, or that can be made to divide people. That's what the elites do. They figure out a way of, okay, it's the immigrants, that's the fault. Or wouldn't you rather talk about abortion? Or, or isn't it, they would rather make an issue of things like gay and lesbian rights. It seems obvious that gays and lesbians should have rights, but they want to make an issue of it. Now, maybe you should think about this again, or isn't this against the Bible? They're just ways of distracting people from from their common causes. And maybe in Chile, you've begun to discover the common causes.
Ese libro, agregó Pablo, muestra muchas historias de descontento, una de las constantes en la obra de Sacco que aporta múltiples perspectivas. ¿Cómo elige esas historias?
Well, like anything, you go to a place and you find some people who know the communities. Perhaps it's a priest, perhaps it's a social worker. You can, through these people, they can guide you to people who would make good examples for your stories. It's sort of general journalistic practice. It's harder to go in blind and just start asking questions. It's better when, especially in a community that you're an other, you have a different color skin, or you're from another background or class. It's easier when you have someone from that community who can introduce you.
Joe Sacco aparece en su trabajo como un personaje de labios gruesos y anteojos que ocultan sus ojos. En Días de Destrucción, Días de Revuelta no aparece, no es visible. ¿Cómo se toma esa decisión?
Well, I felt Chris Hedges was writing most of the scenes that would sort of describe our movements. Most of the things I was doing was just taking someone's testimony, an interview with that person, and just drawing it. There was really little need for me to show the interactions because there was a lot of things I wanted to cover, and I always think those interactions are interesting, but in this particular case, I felt like the prose was setting up those scenes. I didn't need to set them up myself. Do you know what I mean? It's like the prose, what Chris was writing was creating the background for those individual stories. And the testimony spoke for itself.
Los viajes de Joe Sacco suelen ser a países en crisis, que están en conflicto o que están intentando superar un conflicto. ¿Cómo se prepara? ¿Cómo es su rutina de trabajo para registrar lo que ahí sucede? ¿Escribe y dibuja en el mismo lugar? Esto nos respondió.
Well, you prepare by reading as much as you can about the subject and learning about it, though that's never enough. I mean, it's usually at 1/10 of what the reality is. It's only when you're on the ground that you begin to really understand something of the situation. So I prepare in that way, but then I always try to find someone who can be a guide somehow.
Like a fixer? Or not necessarily?
Not usually a fixer, because a fixer is usually very professional. And as good as they can be professionally, they're sort of detached. So I usually try to find someone from the community. Their English, for me, might not be as good as a professional fixer, but what they don't have with the English language, they usually have with contacts in a community, and also they're usually people who are well trusted in the community. So when you're with that person, it helps people trust you. So I find that really important. I do a lot of interviews like you're doing now. I behave basically like a journalist, but besides the interviews, I write a lot in journals because there are many things that happen that are not interviews that are very interesting, like things that are happening on the street, some episode, they're bulldozing a home. That's not an interview, but you go and I take notes about that and then later put that into journals. So my evenings are often very long because after all the reporting, I want to take down everything that happened in the day in my journals. So it is usually an extra hour or so at the end of the day. I take photographs for reference so I can draw certain things. I seldom sketch. I'll only sketch if there's no other way to take a photograph. For example, some military position that you're not allowed to take pictures of the military position. You're with people, you don't want to put them in danger, so I sketch. I draw the military position. I collect all my material. I take it back home with me. And then I have a very long process of indexing my notes. It can take a long time. But basically, I have so much material, so many interviews, and so many journal entries that it's easy to get lost in them. So I have to go through and index everything.
And are you digitalizing your notes, or you just have them like physical form?
It depends. I mean, mostly, sometimes, depending, I'll bring my computer and type. But often I don't want to bring a computer because that can be easily searched. And so I will bring notepads and just write longhand. And sometimes it's a combination of both. So I organize my notes. I spend quite a bit of time then writing a story. And then after the story is written, I'll begin drawing. And the drawing is what takes the longest time. And it could take months, it could take years. I just finished a book that took 4 years, so that's sort of typical.
En un libro como Notas al pie de Gaza, Joe Sacco transparenta a su lector cómo se aproxima a los eventos, a las personas. Abre una ventana a su modo de trabajo y las complicaciones que conlleva. Le preguntamos cómo describe él su personalidad al conversar con testigos y protagonistas de sus historias.
That's a hard one to describe. I mean, I think of myself as a generally friendly person. So that's what I bring. I bring my general friendliness. I'm not a threatening person. I'm not a big guy. I don't have a big camera. So I'm generally pretty low key. And it depends. I mean, sometimes you have to do interviews and this is your chance and you have to talk about certain things. I would prefer to get to know the person a bit socially before I talk to them. It's not always possible. But those are usually the best situations. So, I don't know. Some things sort of cannot be taught exactly. But I think if you approach things with an open heart, people respond to that. I just finished a book about Indigenous people in Canada, and a lot of people told me, don't talk about this, behave this way, it's like this with Indigenous people. And some of that was true. But some of it really inhibited my normal personality. And it made it difficult for me because I kept trying to go by certain rules that just grate against who I am. And it was better to me when I just tried to be genuine with those people and let them decide if they wanted to be genuine back.
El título de nuestra entrevista escrita con Joe Sacco es, comillas, Nunca puedes escapar de la violencia, cierre comillas. Su trabajo ha estado vinculado a zonas de conflicto, pero en los últimos años ha girado para poner foco en la violencia sistémica, en la pobreza, en la desigualdad. Esta fue su reflexión al respecto.
Partly I wanted to get away from physical violence. I got really tired of drawing war zones. I got really tired of drawing bodies. I mean, if you want to know the truth. And I thought I would get out of journalism. In fact, I tried to get out of journalism in a certain sense. Then I realized, I'm a journalist at heart. I like talking to people. And what was important to me even now is to have some project that isn't journalistic, that's somehow different. It sort of helps my psychology. But the journalism remains important. And the topics I've been looking at since are migration, poverty in the United States. I've done stories about poverty in India, and this book about Indigenous people. But the truth is you can never escape violence. Like you're saying, there are other forms of violence. And if you take someone's culture, as they did in Canada, and try to erase it by forcing the children to speak only English and hitting them when they speak their own languages, and you separate them from their parents and grandparents and communities for months and months at a time, that's violence. It's a different kind of violence. It's harder to measure that violence. Usually violence is measured in lives lost, people wounded, but poverty is a form of violence, and institutionalized poverty is a form of violence. And I think people begin to feel that here too. You know, it's a joke if someone is 67 years old and they're getting $140 a month for their pension, and then they have to go back to work. I mean, how long are you going to tell people to stand on their feet and work? It's a form of violence. And really what it's about is like, well, we want to make a profit, and sorry to you, but that's just the way it is. And that's freedom. For some people, making a profit is freedom because it's free. It's a free economy. It's free markets. And I'm not totally against the market. I think the market has its place, but that kind of thinking, that kind of neoliberal version ends up hurting people. And the wounds can be psychological too. Why are so many Chileans on antidepressants? You know, why so many Americans on antidepressants? Because their lives are made unhappy and really stressful. That to me is a form of violence.
Hablamos también sobre sus referentes, George Orwell, el escritor francés Céline, Hunter S. Thompson. ¿Cómo influyeron en su trabajo como periodista e ilustrador?
There are certain people who write in a certain way that is really liberating when you read their work. Hunter S. Thompson is one of those people. You read his book on the American election of 1972 called Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. Now, this is an old election, who cares really? But if you read the book, it's hilarious. And he's calling out bullshit when it's bullshit. It's another way of talking about politics, and you're so used to this dreary way of hearing about politics, and then you read a writer who grabs the issue and starts shaking it somehow, and it's a revelation to you. And you also realize someone like that really understood the electoral process, like the political system and how it worked. He wasn't just making jokes. He understood it, and he was tearing it apart. That was it's revelatory. Céline in the same way. Now, Céline was sort of a notorious fascist in a way. He belonged to the Vichy French. But he's such a great writer. I mean, to me, what can I get from someone even if I don't like their politics? And he also did the same thing. I don't know if you've read Céline, but he's probably one of the funniest authors I've ever read in my life. And he interviewed pretty much my writing style, because he would be talking about something and would be describing it in a very funny way, but over and over and over, almost repetitiously, but not quite, separated by these ellipses, by 3 dots. Just these sharp phrases. And I've brought a lot of that kind of way of writing, which I would say is more, it's got more of a poetic approach to it. And Orwell, to me, he represents is a great integrity in all his work. The great books of his, I think Homage to Catalonia is a very good book, but also Down and Out in Paris and London, which is about washing dishes in Paris in the 1920s when he had no money at all, just the weird characters around him living the lower class life. And then he sort of basically joined people on the street and sort of tried to live that life. Maybe you could say it was a bit of slumming, but he really showed how people who have nothing, who are homeless, live. The other book he wrote was The Road to Wigan Pier, which is about coal miners. And he took a room with coal miners where people would rent the bed. So you have the bed for 8 hours and you're renting it, basically. And just how people were living. These people who were also sacrificed for capitalism. You know, I mean, he got to the heart of something, and he really tried to find out how people are living their lives, how they're trying to fight against these systems, and how sometimes they're overwhelmed by those systems. So also a great influence to me.
Después de esta respuesta, Pablo replicó: en homenaje a Cataluña, Orwell se unió a los republicanos, tomó parte en el conflicto. ¿Siente Joe Sacco ganas de involucrarse más durante sus coberturas?
It's true. He literally picked up a rifle. He was in the trenches. He tried to kill fascists. There's a famous scene of him, I think maybe not described by him in his book, but I think described by someone else of someone from Franco's army running in a trench, and he was behind him trying to get him with a bayonet. So he put his life on the line. But his first instincts were as a reporter, because then he began to look at how the left fell apart, the differences between the anarchists and the communists, the role of the Soviet Union in this whole thing, and how the left basically crushed the left. So he was always analytical. He went to fight, but in the end, it's really a book of journalism. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think of my journalism as part of a struggle in my own way. I'm not a particularly violent person. I'm not sure if that would be a good use of what I can do. I have a lot of anger, like a lot of other people do, but I try to direct it in my work in a way that is palatable to people. Where they can say, okay, I can read this, but you've got to be careful with that kind of anger. I think it can make a work really tedious. And I've always thought that my work should be readable. I want the reader to want to keep turning the page, never to overwhelm the reader with my own emotion or my own anger or whatever it is.
Quisimos averiguar si antes de viajar se interesa por leer obras de ficción o de no ficción de los países que visitará. ¿Se obtiene algo de ese tipo de lecturas?
That would be best to do all that. It would be best to do all that. It would be best to read a lot of local authors, and it would be really good to read fiction, poets, and all that. I do my best, but you never can sort of do enough. Before I came here, I read just a couple of books, but really about by writers who have lived here or are from here, by an economist who is from here, for example, and someone who was in the Allende administration, who was an American, who was basically an advisor. It would be great to read fiction. That's something I should be doing too. The thing is, I have stacks of books, and I'm reading about 3 or 4 books at a time. And sometimes, I don't do everything I could do just because of the lack of time. But I think you're right. I think you get a taste in your mouth when you read fiction, especially. Journalism puts down a lot of dots, but sometimes you cannot confirm what happens between those dots, and what fiction does is draw the line.
En el encuentro de ilustración y cómic de la Reina, Joe Sacco participó en varias actividades. Una de ellas fue un panel junto a Malimagen. En ese conversatorio, una de las preguntas del público fue por la responsabilidad de los medios y periodistas en la crisis. Por eso aprovechamos de preguntarle cómo cree que debería ser la formación de periodistas y cómo incluir más cultura visual.
Well, I don't know exactly what should be taught in journalism school. I only know that when I went to what was considered a good journalism school in America, and it was disappointing to me because the main approach was, we had to write a feature article, for example, and I would write a feature article about something that interested me, and the professor's question to me was, what's the market for this? Who's going to buy this? And that was like a part of it that really didn't settle well with me. I don't want to, when you're 19 years old, you don't want to hear what the market is going to take. You want a fire lit under your ass so you'll go out into the world and see what's happening. And that's not what I was getting. That's part of the disappointment. So I would try to make journalists feel like, this is a noble profession. It's an important one. It's one of the main pillars of a democratic society. You have a responsibility. You need to know what's going on with people. You do not exist to serve power. You exist to really find out what's going on and reflect back to people what they know is going on.
Finalmente, cerramos con una referencia a su ciudad de residencia, Portland, que tiene un lema particular, Keep Portland Weird, algo así como deja que Portland siga siendo rara. ¿Se considera Joe Sacco una persona extraña, diferente en relación al campo periodístico y de ilustración?
I don't think of myself as particularly weird. In a lot of ways, I think of myself as a normal guy. I don't know what that means exactly. But I just have chosen a different path. It's hard for me to have a boss. It's hard for me to hear orders, but I think a lot of people feel this, but they're frustrated because they can't do anything about it. I have a lot of friends among the journalism profession, and what I've found is there are a lot of good reporters, even in the mainstream. They have their frustrations. When I was in Sarajevo, some people wanted to tell longer stories, but the requirements of London or Washington or New York, their editors, was every day you have to get a story in. And when you have to file a story every day, you can never really sink into something slowly. You just always have to produce. So there were a lot of journalists who were good, who maybe were frustrated, I think. And when they saw I gave myself the freedom to be in a place for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, I think they were a little envious. It's like anything. There are great journalists. I've met many of them. And they're the ones who are usually committed to telling, basically telling it like it is. I mean, it sounds so silly or like such a easy phrase, but that's the truth. And that's why there's credibility problems when people know that's not how it is. They know that this isn't really the whole story. And I don't know. Let's see how the future of journalism goes. I hope people will be more committed to the honest truth.
Esta entrevista con Joe Sacco fue realizada el 2 de noviembre de 2019 en la casona Nemesio Antunes durante el 7º encuentro de ilustración y cómic en La Reina. Agradecemos a la organización del evento por gestionar el tiempo y espacio que tuvimos con el autor, y a las editoriales Planeta y Penguin Random House por facilitarnos ejemplares de sus libros para preparar la conversación. Si te gustó esta entrevista, compártela. Estamos en Spotify y donde escuchas tus podcasts favoritos. Si quieres, nos puedes seguir en redes sociales. Nos encuentras en Twitter, Facebook e Instagram con el mismo nombre, Ojo en Tinta. También puedes revisar nuestro sitio web ojoentinta.com, donde publicamos reseñas, entrevistas y otros temas relacionados con los libros y la lectura. Además, en nuestro canal de YouTube puedes revisar más de 100 entrevistas que hemos realizado para nuestro programa de televisión. Eso ha sido todo, saludos y buenas lecturas.